Hey, leaders, and welcome back to Lessons in Leadership. I appreciate everybody for joining us. Hopefully, you are a returning listener. If you're not, welcome. We appreciate you joining us. This is a show and a channel dedicated to educating and equipping the leaders of today to be the leaders of tomorrow. It is our goal and our mission to create leaders out of everybody, whether you're the leader of yourself, the leader of your home, the leader of your community, or the leader of our country. We think that everybody has the ability to be a leader, and it's our goal to help you realize that ability. So, if you were lucky enough to join us on our last episode, we talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how almost everything that we do in leadership can be traced back to a psychological underpinning that causes people to do what they do. Whether that's an individual that works for you, an individual that buys from you, or anything in between, there is a reason that people do what they do. And the better we can understand those reasons, the better we can work with people to get the results that we desire. So this episode, we're going to jump in. I'm going to explain to you, tell you a story about how communication is paramount to everything that we do. Communication is how we convey our thoughts and our feelings, and how the other person or how we interpret those that language or those gestures or whatever it is that we're using to communicate. So to begin with, there's in any type of communication, there's going to be a sender and a receiver. The sender is going to be relaying or sending the information. The receiver is going to be the one taking it in. What's important to understand is that the world that we live in, the physical world, is what it is. It's the same for everybody. We don't subscribe to the Matrix or anything like that, obviously. This is a real world. If I touch a fire, I get burned. So what we have to realize is that every individual has a different way of how they interpret, how they see that world. All of our senses are different. Some of us have heightened sight, heightened smell, heightened sound. So when we talk about sending and receiving information, we need to think about it from an auditory being visual. Visual being, our sight, and then auditory being how we hear. Those are two of the main ways that we receive information. So, the way I see something, so the way I might see a female is going to be different from the way another female might interpret that female, just off the pure visual. The way I might see a male is going to be different than the way a female might see a male. There may be instant interpretations of it being a threat, or of it being a rival, or anything in between. That's going to lead a lot into how we communicate with the other people in the room. So we just need to be cognitive of that we have our own perception, our own biases that cause us to interpret things differently than other people. So when we're speaking to an employee or we're speaking to a superior, we need to be cognitive of how we're perceiving that situation versus how they may be perceiving that situation. That can change a lot of how the intended information is sent. So when you're speaking to someone, you want to, my secret is to go in and try to go into that situation with the intent of learning. Go in and look at that individual and think, I really care about what you have to say. What can I learn from you? So if you approach that situation with that intent, it's going to change a lot about how you listen and are able to pay attention to what they're saying. And then really, really dig in and try to be as present as possible in that and listen to what they have to say, to learn everything that you possibly can about them. So when they're speaking, are they using specific words? Are they saying like, I hear you, I want you to hear what I'm saying, or it sounds like this? Those are going to be clues that their preferred way of taking in information or receiving information is probably auditory. They like to hear things. Are they saying words like, I see what you're saying? That's not the way I saw it. I can kind of picture this, or if you'll sort of share my vision. So those are going to be obviously indicators that they are visual. They really like to see things. And then another one that we didn't talk about initially, but there is kinesthetic, which is sort of a feel or a touch. So you'll hear people say, I kind of feel what you're saying, or I can grasp that. I was really touched by what this person had to say. So that's another indicator right there that they're very into hands-on, touching, feeling something to how they like to receive information. So that can go a long way if we can be intuitive enough to hear that and get that bit of information. Now we can start using our when we go to send information, we can harness that information that we just learned and tailor our information to that individual. So that's going to help a lot when we go to communicate. The other part, so we're making sure that we as the sender are tailoring our information to who the intended recipient is, or the intended receiver. That's huge. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just begin to talk without actually taking into account who they're going to talk to and how they want that information to be received. That can be very dangerous, because as we learned, you may intend for it to say one thing or mean one thing, and it can be interpreted in a completely different way. So you want to be very careful about how you're sending information, and take the time to sit down and think about it before you say it or before you send it. So we've talked about the actual language a little bit and sculpting that for the intended recipient. We also want to talk about nonverbal. So there's a lot of information that gets received, a lot of times unbeknownst to the sender, and that can be things such as body language, even things that we may not realize, but tone, pitch, the cadence of how we're speaking. So if it's really, really fast, or if it's slowed down, depending on the situation. If I'm trying to give a sales pitch, I definitely want it to be upbeat, quick, very poignant, and make my point very, pick specific words that I really dig in on and pronunciate, whether it's like the sale or it's the benefit or whatever it may be that I really want to highlight with my speech. But we also want to make sure that I'm not slouched over, hunched shoulders. If I'm trying to sell you something, I want to be up. I want to be shoulders back. I want to be head up, eyes forward. Same thing when you're talking to an employee. You want to make sure that you're conveying the right type of body language that correlates to the message you're trying to receive or trying to send. So that's some basics, and that one-on-one conversations are paramount in what we do. We need to make sure we're taking those time to go in and learn about individuals, how they like to receive information, so that we can make our conversations with them as effective as possible. And then the other type of communication is obviously going to be written form. So email is one of the most prevalent. We do some texting in today. We do a lot of texting, but for business world, I think that we're still the email is probably the most common and definitely the most professional form of communication. So you just want to take your time and make sure you go over your email. Sit down and think about, what am I trying to convey before you write it, before you compose that email. What is my intended message? Who is my intended audience? What is it I'm trying to tell them? So the email that I would send to a superior is going to be much different than the email I would send to, say, an hourly associate. The email I would send to an hourly associate may dig in a lot more into individual micro level things, as to where the email I'm going to send to an executive peer is going to be a lot more high level, not as granular information. It's going to be more broad stuff. So really got to think about that. And then also to the individual, if I'm trying to persuade in any type of fashion or form, the language I'm going to use for my director of marketing is going to differ greatly than my director of finance or my director of human resources. I'm going to use a verbiage and language that resonates with them. So, whether I'm talking to HR and I'm talking about regulatory adherence or safety, I might talk about things from a HR perspective. What are our rules and regulations, and what are our policies? And then if I'm talking to our finance, I'm definitely going to use things like credits and debits and capital expenditures and reserves, and just words that are going to stick out and make sense to them. And same thing with marketing. We're going to talk about audience and attention and the capture rate and conversion rate, campaigns, just different words that's going to stick out and mean something to them, because whatever we tend to focus on, we tend to see and find, and it means something to us. So people say that people's names is one of the sweetest sounds they ever hear. Same thing when if you're a chef and you hear things like saute and grill and different words, it instantly draws your attention, sticks out, and makes you perk up and pay attention. So we want to use that to our advantage. And then we just also, to be effective communicators, to take all this and kind of bundle it together, we want to make sure that when we send a message, we follow up and make sure that that message was received. So, if I send an email to somebody, I'll follow up later and say, hey, just make sure you got that email. Did you have any questions about it? I wanted to take a second just to make sure that, there wasn't any misunderstandings or anything I didn't explain well. And I always make sure that I relay it that way and say, is there something that I didn't do properly or didn't relay properly? So, and then same thing, I like to reiterate. Anytime I'm taking in a message, I'll always take the time to follow back up. And I think anytime you're listening to someone, I always like to sort of take a quick minute or two at the end of the conversation to properly calibrate what I heard and relay it back to them. A, it shows that, hey, this guy really was listening to me, and B, it makes sure that there aren't any vague or misunderstandings between the two. So I'll just sort of give it a really brief overview. So, and I'll say, okay, so I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying. You want me to ... and just give a quick reiteration of what they said, how you understood it, and make sure that you guys are both on the same page. So those are paramount, whether you're having a one-on-one conversation or it's a broad conversation or an email, is that you sculpt it to the intended audience. You make sure that the message was received, make sure that it was understood the way it was intended to be received, and then follow up continuously to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And that, for the most part, is communication in a nutshell. It can obviously get a lot more in depth. We can talk a lot more about things, but I think we tend to overcomplicate it anyway. So I'm going to stop there on communication, and I'm going to jump into a listener question. So from our last episode, we talked about the different types of psychology. We talked about leadership and kind of how we can use the psychological part of the human psychology and how that equates to leadership. So one of the questions I received was, what do you think about the presidential candidates and their forms of leadership? So I want to preface this with say that I do not like to get into the political realm. I do not like to touch on that, especially in this type of forum. But what I will say is, just from a pure leadership perspective, if we look at the two forerunners of the main parties, so you have the Republican and the Democrat, I think it's helpful to look at our nation, our country, as a corporation. There's lots of similarities. Whether in a company you have shareholders, the people that own the company, and then you have the board of directors, so a group of individuals that are tasked with ensuring that the company does the best interest of the shareholders, and that it follows through on its intended purpose, which is usually to make a profit. And a good CEO, who essentially is what the president would be, has to do a couple things. They don't necessarily have to be an expert at any one thing. They do need to be a good communicator. They do need to be able to bring people to the table and get parties to work together. They need to be able to effectively communicate and paint a picture, tell a story that harnesses the power of all the individuals. So you got to get the workers rallied to want to do the job. You got to get the shareholders excited to want to invest and follow you on that journey. And you got to get the board of directors on your side. If you are ineffective at any one of those elements, it can really hamper your ability to be effective and get things pushed through. If you're going to spend large sums of money, you have to get the board of directors sign of a seal of approval. If you want the company to be, have the money necessary, you've got to be profitable. You got to get all the different lines of business working together. So there's a lot of complexities, and it's sort of the same with a country. I will say that the main difference when you start looking at, global economics and all the different things that go into it. So while our goal is to make a profit with a company, it may not necessarily be true of a country, even though we want to raise GDP, gross domestic product. I think that a lot of times the government, in my opinion, takes in revenue via taxes to ensure that we have a military that can protect us, ensure that we have infrastructure. So their main goal is to create a environment that's conducive to allowing all the individuals, the businesses and the individuals that own and operate those businesses and all the assets that go into running a business, have the ability to do so free of fear of it being taken away, that we have a great judicial system that allows for ownership and the ability to move commerce across the state. So there's a lot of different facets that the government has to do that isn't necessarily done as a for-profit venture. And then a lot of other things that we have to do to think about our country's best interest, from national security to, what's the best welfare of people. Obviously, with a company, we may not necessarily always think about what's the overall best welfare for all of our shareholders, or from not just a strictly monetary, I guess I should say. And then also the stakeholders. A good company nowadays has to be a good corporate citizen and do everything they have to do to make people happy and make sure they're not using, forced labor. but not like a country has to do and provide all the welfare and social services, I guess you would say, sort of a safety net that they have to. So, with that all being said, I'll say that I think that you look at companies also in different stages of their life. So you have, startups, and then you have companies that are fairly mature, and then you have companies that are sort of at the end of their life cycle. Same with countries. Countries are going to have that. America is a fairly young country, but we're mature in that we have a really deep, well-established moat. We don't have to worry too much about people coming in and taking over. We're not out trying to conquer other areas, so we're fairly saturated. We're just continuing to grow internally and refine a lot of our processes and maintain our position. So personally, if I was going to install someone right now, I think Trump does a great job as a promoter. He's a small business owner. Maybe now, it's a larger business, but I think that's his mentality. This is all my perspective. This is just my opinion, but I think he's a great communicator. He's a great at bringing people together, bringing people to the table, getting deals done. He's a great promoter. Well, that's obvious. He like him or hate him, he's got proven success. He was a TV star. He's a real estate mogul. He's had lots of other ventures out there, and before he became president, if we want to tell the truth, anybody and everybody that was wanted to be somebody had their picture taken with Trump, was at his parties, went to the events that he held at his casinos, the Tyson fights, and all that kind of stuff. So I think he's a great hype person, great at doing those things necessary to get funding, to get people on board, to get people excited, get people a buzz generated, and get people willing to jump in. Biden, I think, obviously, another issue we run into is the age-old conversation: who's better, Jordan or LeBron? Well, they're not playing against each other. So you're looking at people in different cycles of their life. So, Biden's older. Would he be different if he was younger? Obviously. But I think that this is a good example of an older CEO that's probably in the twilight of their career running a well-established company or a well-established country. And his goal there is not to necessarily set the world on fire, necessarily try to go into hyper-growth mode. His goal is really to take a country that he inherited that was having a lot of turmoil, inner turmoil, warring factions, and this happens in companies. That's where you get hostile takeovers, and try to bring some normalcy back to it. I think he's done a decent job of that. So when you look at leadership, I would say they're just different. I mean, they have different goals. They have different styles. Is one better than the other? That's hard to say. It's really hard to say. I think that what we need is we definitely want to start looking at someone that is going to be able to come into our current, or when we look at it 2024, someone that's going to be able to work with the legislative branch, someone that's going to be able to work with the judicial branch, be able to get things done, be able to make America, the average citizen, excited and want to invest. That's any time that money stops flowing. Money is not really supposed to be a store of value. It's meant to be invested and have a high velocity of turnover in the economy. So that's something we need to think about: is who is going to excite and ignite confidence in the average people, like the consumer or the American people, and get them out spending money. Who's going to make them feel safe and confident that we have we're safe. We don't have to worry about invasion. We don't have to worry it seems like now we're always worried about some impending doom. So that's one thing we need to think about as a leader. We want someone that's going to convey strength, confidence in our military power, in our economy. Someone that is going to also maintain that, build on our infrastructure, continuing to improve that, build on our social safety networks, and help ensure that we have a strong social program to help the disadvantaged, and that we have good global economic policies where we're, facilitating trade amongst other countries, helping the disadvantaged countries. I'm a big believer that education changes lives. So a lot of the impoverished third world countries, if we can help educate them, train them on how to be more self-sufficient, better health, curb a lot of the problems that cause a lot of their high mortality rates and extremely high birth rates. All these things kind of correlate together. You have a high mortality rate, so you have a higher birth rate. All these different things. You don't have a social safety network, so there's no fallback plan. So you got to have a lot of kids to help ensure you have people to take care of you. So all these different things go together, and as we increase the education level, I think that a lot of those things will decrease. But to answer that question, I know I went long on this one, but to answer that question, who's the better leader? I don't think there is a better or worse. I think we need to look at that. I do think that if I look at the emerging candidates, if I was looking for a leader that I would just want to pick, it probably wouldn't be either of the two right now. Although the sad thing is that we really have a two-party political system, and it's almost impossible for anybody to get their parties. If you were running as a third-party candidate, it's almost impossible to get over that hurdle, because you have people that are just going to vote Republican, vote Democrat, regardless of who the candidate is. So I do like RFK. I think he brings a lot to the table. I think he's educated. He's got the brand. He's well known. People know his name, know his legacy. I think he could be a strong candidate. I don't think he would have the ability to overcome the hurdle of the two-party system. I think he'd be a great vice president candidate. DeSantis, same thing. I think he's displayed a lot of good leadership policies. I think he, one of the things you have to do, if you think about great CEOs that went out there, they did a lot of things to get publicity and drum up newsworthy things to get their name out there and get their brand out there. And then a lot of times, once they served their purpose, they would hand over the reins to a different CEO and let them kind of guide it. But DeSantis is trying to do that, in my opinion. I think he's trying to create a name for himself. Same as Newsom. I think they're trying to, at that stage where they're at, is to get some notoriety and build a brand. And I think DeSantis has accomplished it. He went about it by taking on some huge brands that everybody was familiar with. He, in my opinion, took a page out of the playbook of Trump, and so he kind of appealed to some of that base, which was, obviously, if we look at the last election, that was about half of the country. So if you can endear yourself to that large group of people, you definitely have a fighting chance. Same with Newsom. I think, Florida gets a lot of the retirees, a lot of more conservative, because as you age and acquire assets, I think you become more conservative, and as you get older, you become more conservative. Then you have California with Newsom, that is sort of the opposite. I think it's the quintessential Democratic sort of experiment, in my opinion, but it's not to say that it's wrong. It's just what it is. You got a lot, I think, younger people. You have more of the entertainers and subcultures and things like that. So that's going to have that appeal. I think he's taken on a lot of social issues that matter a lot to those people, trying to help the homeless, all those different things. And I think he's gained a lot of notoriety for that, and he's well known. So I think both of them have done good at, if you look at young startup companies, they've done a lot to appeal to people and build a cult-like following. And so, I would liken them to, let's say, a young beverage company that created some cool beverage, whether maybe it's an energy drink or something like that, and it's kind of picked up and people are really liking it. Or maybe DeSantis is a new bottled water and Gavin Newsom is a new energy drink, and they're out there, they're doing all the events, they're getting all the publicity. And then you look at Trump and Biden, and they're more of the Coca-Cola and Pepsi, really well, deeply entrenched, well-funded companies that you're just not going to go up against very easily. You're not going to knock them off the shelves. You're not going to beat them in marketing. You're not going to beat them in store loyalty. If it's just not going to happen. In fact, as a company, your best bet is acquisition, right? So you hope to grow it to a certain market cap, a certain amount of whatever you want to call market cap, notoriety, and then one of those big companies come in and buy you out. And so that, in my opinion, is going to be the best play. You have Trump absorb DeSantis as a vice president. You have a Biden absorb Newsom as vice president. And then, of course, later on, they can run and they'll be that person. They'll be at that stage or in their life cycle where they've become the big company and they're ready to step on stage and do that. I just think right now that's where they're at. So I hope that answers the question as far as who I think is the best leader. I don't think you can say, who's better, Coke or Pepsi. I don't. They have different strategies. They both huge in the beverage markets. They both have people that swear by them. Coca-Cola drinkers don't drink Pepsi. Pepsi don't drink Coca-Cola. It is what it is. Those people are going to not change their minds, and neither one's right or wrong. Coca-Cola has more of a 100% beverage focus. Pepsi tends to branch out and delve into the fast food and the edible market, all the different consumer brands that they own. So which one's right or wrong? I don't know. It's whoever you like the best and whoever has the product that you prefer. Same with the politicians. I think, there's going to be people that love Trump. There's going to be people that love Biden because that's their brand. That's what they decide to stand with. And no matter what either one of them does, they're not changing. And then there's going to be those sort of middle water people that are going to be swayed depending on little things, who's got the cheapest price of the week. If Coca-Cola's on sale, Pepsi's on sale, or maybe they run a great promotion, or maybe they, have a great Super Bowl ad, those people are going to go get that product. So that's really going to be the big decision. And any CEO you bring into Coca-Cola or Pepsi, unless they have some major, newsworthy scandal, that will sway people. Obviously we saw that with I guess Bud Light, but that's going to cost some. But other than that, their ability to get stuff done is going to be completely dependent on bringing the board together, bringing the shareholders together, bringing all the departments together, and being able to excite the consumer. And it's the same with the politicians. It's they're neither one's a better leader per se. It's just who's going to be the best at getting all the parties to play together and making the consumer or the citizens happy, confident, and excited. So I hope that answers that question. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this, Please like, please subscribe. If you have any questions and you'd like to have me address those questions on air, please send them in. You can leave them as comments. You can email us at the link below, and I will be happy to cover them. Please check us out. We're on all the social medias, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.